I was thinking, we usually think of freedom as this wide open ocean, right?
Right.
Like no land in sight, no set destination, just the ability to sail wherever the wind takes you, just
Right.
complete and total autonomy.
The ultimate dream for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens when that wide open ocean is actually this violent, raging storm? And, the very people who are supposed to teach you how to navigate are the ones actively tearing holes in the hull.
Yeah. That changes the whole picture.
It really does. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a woman who built this massive illicit underground empire, basically just to feel a sense of safety, and the really terrifying length her mind went to when that safety inevitably collapsed.
Yeah, and we pulled this incredible story from a YouTube interview transcript. It's from a channel called Hard Knocks Talks Your Addiction podcast. And the guest telling her story is a woman named Valerie.
Right.
And honestly, her journey is this profound psychological case study.
Right.
We're going to trace how severe foundational childhood trauma creates this really desperate need for control.
It's intense.
It is. We're looking at how a human being can swing from complete lawless chaos into this heavily armed isolation, and then finally into a very rigid faith-based structure.
And we should probably mention up front, her story goes into some incredibly dark territory, especially, regarding her psychological state at the height of her addiction.
Yeah.
Like, she talks extensively about seeing shadow figures, demons, practicing witchcraft, and eventually experiencing what she describes as divine intervention.
Which, that brings up a really important lens for how we're approaching this today.
Right, exactly.
Because whether you, as the listener, view these dark entities as literal supernatural demons, or maybe as the severe manifestations of meth-induced psychosis, blending with unprocessed trauma, the absolute terror she experienced was completely real to her.
Oh, 100% real.
Yeah. We aren't here to debate theology. We are just going to unpack these elements impartially as Valerie's lived reality and look at her brain's response to extreme stress and just chemical overload.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the highly structured, illegal empire Valerie eventually builds, you really have to understand the absolute madness of where she started.
You really do.
We are talking about a childhood on a Paiute tribe reservation. Her mother and her Native American stepdad were heavily, and I mean heavily, addicted to meth and alcohol.
Right.
And that addiction didn't just make them negligent, it fueled this terrifying, all-consuming paranoia.
Yeah, because methamphetamine psychosis, it completely strips away the brain's ability to filter threat detection.
Yeah.
Like everything becomes a conspiracy.
Everything.
The source details how her parents would literally crawl on the floor looking for hidden government bugs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and her mother firmly believed that Oprah Winfrey was communicating with her directly through the television set about breast cancer.
Wait, Oprah.
Yes, Oprah.
That is, they were constantly on the run, too. Valerie remembers moving the family from California to Arizona on these dusty back roads just to hide from aliens.
Right, the alien delusion.
Yeah. And the twist here is that her parents believed the aliens were their friends. But the government was conspiring with the aliens against them.
It's so convoluted.
It is. Valerie and her brother would spend days hiding in closets, just waiting for this imaginary threat to pass. Think about the psychological weight of that for a developing brain.
It's crushing.
She actually remembers looking out the window as a little girl and asking her mom, "Why don't the aliens talk to me?"
That detail is just heartbreaking because it perfectly illustrates how normalized this delusion became for her. Children look to their parents to define reality.
Right.
If your parents say aliens are hunting you, well, that becomes your baseline truth. But the paranoia was just the psychological layer. The physical baseline was total abandonment and extreme violence. Her parents would disappear for a month or two at a time on drug binges.
She and her brother lived this incredibly transient life across the tribal land, just, bouncing from a cousin's couch to an uncle's floor. She recounts breaking into a store once just to steal basic food so the kids could eat. And when the adults were actually around, it wasn't safe. It was incredibly dangerous. She witnessed her stepdad stab his own nephew in the neck.
God.
Tragically, she also endured severe sexual abuse from her grandfather, her stepdad, and various community members.
And the ultimate betrayal, the moment that really cements her worldview, occurred when she finally gathered the courage to tell her mother about the abuse.
Right.
Instead of protecting her, her mother physically beat her and called her a liar. And within 6 months of that incident, Valerie was placed into the foster care system.
But foster care completely backfires.
Oh, entirely.
By the time she enters the system as a preteen, she is completely wild. Like, she had actually disappeared for an entire year at age 12, just living on the streets, and her mom enforced zero consequences.
A whole year.
A year. So she gets to these foster homes and these new families. They expect her to go to school every day. They expect her to sit down and eat dinner at 6 o'clock. And to Valerie, these basic mundane rules felt entirely crazy. She fought them tooth and nail.
Yeah, and we have to look at the why behind that rebellion. Because for you, listening to this, to really grasp her mindset, you have to recognize that chaos was Valerie's only baseline for safety.
Right. She didn't know anything else.
Exactly. In her experience, structure didn't equal safety, structure equaled vulnerability. To submit to a schedule meant submitting to authority, and literally every authority figure in her life had abused or abandoned her. Lowering her guard just to eat dinner at a set time felt like a life-threatening risk.
It makes total sense when you frame it that way. It's like being born on a ship with no steering wheel, just adrift in a hurricane.
Yeah, good analogy.
Right. And when someone finally steps onto the deck and tries to hand you a map, you fight them because the map feels like a trap. You've only ever survived by bracing for the waves.
Yeah.
By the time she was 18, she had 30 warrants out for her arrest just from running away from group homes. She even taught herself the legal penal codes so she could stand up in court, fight the judge, and basically maneuver her way out of the harsher adult probation system.
Oh.
I know. She was surviving on pure defiance.
Which really sets the stage for her 20s.
Really?
She has spent her entire life trying to outrun her own hypervigilance, and that leads to her first encounter with a substance that fundamentally alters her brain chemistry.
Yeah, and surprisingly, she actually hated alcohol.
Right.
She tried half a beer at a quinceañera as a teenager and couldn't stand the loss of control it gave her. But at 26, she's living in Orange County and dating a gang member. He spends a full year pressuring her to try meth. She finally caves, and her reaction to this massive stimulant isn't at all what you'd expect.
Not at all. She didn't get that manic, bouncing off the walls energy most people associate with the drug. Valerie describes herself as having a severe ADHD and OCD brain, which means she was constantly plagued by racing, anxious, fragmented thoughts. When she tried meth, she experienced a profound aha moment. She said it gave her one clear, calm thought. It was the calmest she had ever felt in her life.
I want to pause on the mechanics of that because it sounds totally counterintuitive. Like, how does a powerful upper create a sense of deep calm?
It comes down to dopamine baseline regulation. Brains with ADHD are essentially starved for dopamine. They have a chronic deficit.
Right.
Because of that deficit, the brain is constantly searching for stimulation, which creates that racing, anxious feeling. When you introduce a massive stimulant like methamphetamine, it floods the brain with dopamine. For a neurotypical person, that creates extreme hyperactivity. But for someone with severe, untreated ADHD, it artificially bridges that deficit.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it temporarily brings them up to a quote-unquote normal baseline, which creates a sudden, shocking sense of quiet and focus.
Wow. And from that artificial chemical calm, she finally feels capable of building something. She had started working as a booker for strippers. One night, one of the girls she booked gets beaten up by a client, and nobody in the room steps in to help.
Terrible.
Valerie is furious. She quits on the spot because she flat out refuses to stand by and watch women get hurt, but the women follow her out the door. And within a year, she transitions into running a full underground escort ring. And she ran this illicit empire for almost 20 years, up until she was 37.
And she ran it with an iron fist, too.
Hmm.
She meticulously screened the clients, actively preferring rich businessmen sugar daddies, as she called them, over gang members.
Trying to minimize the physical danger to the women.
Exactly. If a client so much as raised his voice at one of her workers, she would ban him for years. She controlled the entire environment.
I have to push back on her narrative a little bit here, though.
Sure.
She builds a massive illegal escort empire to protect women. I mean, placing vulnerable women into sex work doesn't exactly sound like a safe haven. It sounds like a massive rationalization.
It absolutely sounds like a rationalization on the surface, but looking closer at the psychological mechanism at play reveals something really fascinating. Valerie's therapist eventually helped her realize that she was subconsciously trying to rewrite her own past.
Interesting.
Remember, she had been a fiercely abused, completely unprotected little girl. By stepping into this madam role, she became the ultimate untouchable authority figure. She was retroactively acting as the fierce protector she never had as a child. It was a profound, deeply ingrained trauma response, just fully disguised as a lucrative business empire.
That makes so much sense. She finally had the steering wheel. She controlled the environment. She controlled the men. She controlled the money. But, manufactured safety has a ceiling.
It always does.
When you build an empire on a foundation of trauma and heavy drug use, the foundation inevitably rots. And for Valerie, it cracked violently as her addiction deepened into her mid-30s.
Yeah, and this is where the psychological and supernatural elements heavily intersect. As a child, she'd been exposed to her parents' satanic rituals. As an adult desperately trying to maintain her grip on this underworld empire, she became deeply involved in witchcraft and tarot.
She spent thousands and thousands of dollars on psychics. She was just obsessed with knowing the future. She needed to know which girls were going to work out, which men had the most money, if a situation was going to turn violent.
Constant hypervigilance.
Right. Think about it. It's like using sonar in a pitch-black ocean. It was a desperate attempt to map out predictability in a life that was fundamentally built on pure, unadulterated volatility.
Well said. And as her meth use peaked to a heavy daily habit around age 35, the darkness escalated dramatically. She recounts being in luxury hotels like the Hilton, pulling guns on high-level gang members.
Wow.
But the internal landscape was even more dangerous. She began experiencing severe hallucinations. She described shadow figures and demons fully manifesting, circling her room and taunting her.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that breakdown. Because how does a brain go from using a drug to feel calm to projecting actual demons into a hotel room?
Think of the brain like a computer processor. For years, she's been running this processor at 300% capacity, using sheer willpower and meth, all while ignoring the massive malware of her childhood trauma.
Okay, right.
Eventually, the cooling fan breaks, and the hardware simply starts short-circuiting. The sleep deprivation, combined with the neurotoxicity of long-term meth use, induces a severe psychosis. The demonic portals she describes opening up are her deeply unprocessed trauma externalizing itself. Her brain is literally projecting her internal terror into the physical room.
And the physical toll on her body was just as catastrophic. She was getting drugs from a Filipino gang member, and the doses were so massive that she fainted 3 times in a single week.
Just push past the limit.
Yeah, the 3rd time, she woke up in the back of an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors told her she had literally burned a hole in her esophagus from the chemical intake. They looked her dead in the eye and said, "If you use again, you are going to die."
The physical and psychological collapse is total at this point. The illusion of control is gone.
She actually tried to get out on her own after that hospital visit. She checked into a sober living facility and was mandated to do 30 recovery meetings in 30 days, and she did them.
That's tough.
It is, but the pull of her old life was too strong. She relapsed 5 or 6 times in that first year alone. The escort industry kept throwing offers at her, literally throwing luxury cars at her to convince her to come back and run things.
Surviving the trauma is one thing, but completely dismantling the only power structure that ever made you feel safe is something else entirely. Her own willpower, battered by decades of trauma and chemical dependency, simply couldn't sustain the boundary. She couldn't say no to the one thing that made her feel powerful.
You'd think nearly dying would be enough to keep someone away. But from a psychological standpoint, she needed an external boundary that was stronger than her own willpower.
Yes.
And ironically, that unbreakable boundary came from the justice system. She gets pulled over for running a red light and driving recklessly, but it turns out the district attorney had been building a case on her for years. Right there on the street, she's arrested for pimping and pandering.
Immediately, her underworld connections try to pull her back in. A celebrity lawyer visits her in county jail, offering a cartel or organization-funded buyout.
Wild.
They promised to handle all her legal trouble and bail her out. On one condition, she had to agree to return to the lifestyle and stay in cahoots with their organization.
But she refuses the offer. And because she refuses, and because the DA knows the severity of her hidden empire, her bail skyrockets from $5,000 to $1 million.
$1 million.
Yeah. She's suddenly facing 7 years in state prison. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Can you imagine feeling free, facing $1 million bail and 7 years in prison? But for Valerie, didn't that actually solve her biggest problem? She felt relief.
It's the ultimate paradox of hitting rock bottom. Jail provided the absolute unbreakable boundary that she couldn't build for herself. She couldn't walk out the door. She couldn't answer the phone and take the luxury cars they were offering. It forced a total system reset.
Wow.
By locking her in a cage, The state inadvertently freed her from the exhausting burden of manufacturing her own safety.
She got placed in a separate cell designated for a drug program away from the general population where she admitted she would normally be the life of the party, hustling and maneuvering.
Right, back to her old tricks.
Exactly. In that quiet cell, totally alone with her thoughts and cut off from the noise, she called out to God. And she describes experiencing the Holy Spirit an overwhelming physical feeling of unconditional love. She specifically contrasts this pure feeling with the, quote, dirty feelings of her childhood molestation and the terror of the shadow figures.
It was the first time in her entire life she experienced a feeling of safety without having to aggressively manufacture it or control another human being to get it. She spent 6 months in that cell, studying, reading, and attending daily meetings.
Yeah.
And then comes the legal miracle of her story. On her 14th court appearance, the judge looks at her case. Because she had operated her escort business so secretively in high-end hotels for decades, she actually had no prior adult criminal record.
That's crazy.
It is. So the judge gave her 2 years of probation instead of 7 years in prison.
But with a massive, terrifying condition. If she messed up even once, if she failed one drug test, she would immediately serve the full 7 years.
High stakes.
So she gets out. And this is where the real work begins. Because surviving a crisis is one thing. Building a mundane, functional, quiet life from scratch is a completely different beast.
Oh, the transition from the boss of an underworld syndicate to a regular, rule-abiding citizen requires immense scaffolding. When she got out, she moved in with members of Crosspoint Church who had visited her while she was incarcerated. She also made a very strategic decision regarding her recovery. She shifted from standard secular meetings to a faith-based program called Celebrate Recovery.
I want to dig into that shift. Why make that specific change? Like, does a faith-based program actually operate differently on a psychological level?
It does, in a few key ways. Practically, she knew that standard meetings might put her in the exact same rooms as people from her old street life, which is a massive relapse trigger. She needed a clean break.
Oh, that makes sense.
But psychologically, programs like Celebrate Recovery integrate trauma processing directly with a spiritual framework. Traditional models often focus heavily on the substance itself, stopping the drug use. Celebrate Recovery focuses heavily on the underlying hurts, habits, and hang-ups.
Right, the root causes.
Exactly. For someone whose addiction was rooted in severe sexual abuse and a total lack of parental protection, substituting the volatile authority figures of her past with a concept of a loving, protective higher power fills a profound psychological void.
And it gave her the stability to enter the normal workforce. I mean, despite only having a 7th grade education because of her transient childhood, she managed to secure a legitimate job at a tech company.
Amazing.
But the journey wasn't a perfect upward trajectory. The source material highlights a crucial stumble. About a year into her sobriety, she relapsed. Not into meth, but into gambling. She went to a trap house and lost $10,000 of her hard-earned money in just 2 months.
Let's define what a trap house is in this context, because it shows how dangerous this relapse was. A trap house is typically an abandoned or severely run-down building, taken over solely for the purpose of selling and using illicit drugs.
Right.
It is the epicenter of the street lifestyle she just escaped. For her to go back to that environment, even just to gamble, means she was flirting with total destruction.
But she pulled herself out of it. She realized what she was doing, and she walked away after those 2 months without touching the drugs.
That self-correction is monumental. It highlights her growing self-awareness. She recognized in that moment that her addiction wasn't just a chemical dependency on methamphetamine, it was a behavioral addiction to risk, to power, and to the dopamine rush of the hustle.
Yeah.
She was chasing the chaos because chaos felt familiar. Recognizing that allowed her to finally shut the door on it.
She really leaned into her healing after that. She actually reconciled with her mother, who is now also in recovery and practicing her faith. And Valerie even cared for her father as he died of cancer. It is. But, and I absolutely love this boundary, she refuses to go back to the reservation where she grew up. She says she forgives the people who hurt her, but she knows that protecting her peace means keeping the doors to that specific toxic past firmly shut.
She has successfully redirected that immense, relentless drive she used to run an illegal empire into something entirely constructive. She wrote a book about her life titled Hustler to Holy, and she spends her own time and money buying high-quality leather-bound Bibles for inmates across the world.
Wow.
Her hope is that current inmates will hear her story on their jail-issued tablets and realize that if she can rewire her life, they can too.
It's also worth noting the broader ecosystem that this story lives in. The
Yeah.
Hard Knocks Talks podcast doesn't just air these raw narratives for shock value. During the interview, they actively promote external resources. Like they highlight SEU West, which is a labor union.
A labor union on an addiction podcast.
Right, it might sound strange, but think about Valerie's story. She built an illegal syndicate because there were no safe structural protections for vulnerable women in her world. Promoting a union is about providing legitimate systemic protections so marginalized workers don't have to turn to the underworld to survive.
That's a great point.
They also promote a program called Parenting in the Storm to help families rebuild trust after the devastation of addiction. It just proves that this conversation is truly about systemic, community-level healing.
Yeah, Valerie's story is undeniably an extreme example, but the underlying mechanisms, how trauma dictates our behavior, the desperate search for control, and the necessity of community support are deeply universal.
It is genuinely incredible to hear her talk at the end of the interview about finding joy in absolutely nothing, just the profound peace of a quiet, normal, boring day. After a life of absolute extremes, from the violent paranoia of the reservation to the adrenaline and terror of the escort empire, she finally just gets to exist.
Yeah.
So we've walked through this entire journey. We've watched the pendulum swing from the extreme, terrifying vulnerability of her youth to the toxic, heavy armor she built as an adult, to finally finding a safe harbor in her faith and her boundaries. So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
This raises a fascinating question, and it's something I really want you to mull over today. As a society, we often define freedom as the ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want. We tend to view rules, routines, and boundaries as a form of imprisonment.
Right.
But Valerie's story suggests the exact opposite. Is it possible that true freedom isn't the absence of boundaries, but rather finding the right boundaries to keep the chaos out?
If you're born on a ship with no steering wheel, maybe the map isn't a trap after all. Maybe it's the only way to finally find dry land. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep seeking out those multiple perspectives, and we will catch you next time.